Almost there. Hello, welcome to Cheyenne's Forum. Today is February 6th, and right now the time is 1 p.m. at Pacific time. And Tom, our longtime dear friend, how are you?
I'm fine. Four
Great.
o'clock. It's 4 o'clock here. It's
I know. Thank
outside
you.
outside Washington, D.C.
Sure, sure. I'm in California here.
I
And
know.
thank you so much for Tom to join us every Tuesday afternoon. And then Tom works in FBA for almost 30 years, and he's been the assistant director of FBA for 5 years. And thank you so much, Tom, to spend your time with us to talk about the important issues of today's world.
Okay. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Sure, thank you. And then we have three topics today. The first one, of course, Carson. He finally interviewed Putin, and then we see he just posted a 4 minutes video on X and explain why and how he got into Moscow and talked to Putin. And very interesting topic, and we will talk about that a little bit. And the second is about the package we are facing right now. I know the Congress will say no to the package, the budget for our border security, but we have lots of issue in this package. So Tom will go through with this topic. And the third, I think it's very important topic today is about a appeal court just reject Trump's claim of the presidential immunity of his federal election interference case. I think this is very, very big. So we'll talk about that as well. Well, and then I just wish everybody, if you watch this video, if you have questions, just leave your questions, and then we can discuss with Tom with your questions. All right, Tom. So we have so many questions. And first, did you see Tar Carson post his video on the X?
Yes, I did. And, I was checking all day on the Tucker Carlson network, which I subscribe to, and on YouTube and locals and other channels to see if it had gotten posted, or on Twitter,
Mhm.
or X now.
Right.
But as of, 30 minutes ago, I saw the 4 minute clip that you're talking about, which Tucker recorded in Moscow,
Right.
and just basically said, "I'm here and stay tuned." And we'll put that interview up, pretty soon, probably either later tonight or tomorrow sometime.
Sure. It's going to be big. And also, I just checked on X for his account, Tar Carson's account. The short video for 4 minutes is posted 2 hours ago. And right
Right.
now we have 17 million views already. So this is just tell me that how eager people need to hear and need to know the truth. That
I think
is very impressive.
exactly. People are very curious. I think most have probably never heard Putin's voice, even though
Right.
there'll be a translator, obviously, but have seen him. And the far right wing elements in the United States are calling Tucker a traitor and he's on Putin's side and all of this. And it's okay when other journalists that they approve of interview heads of state from around the world, even if they're considered, if not enemies, adversarial to the United States. So, we've had that happen in the past, no problem. But now, Tucker goes, the U.S. government and the U.S. media and the Western media have for years tried to portray Putin as an evil dictator, like
Mhm.
he's still a communist.
Mhm.
And the reality is, and I'm not a Putin apologist, and I don't love Putin or anything, but in
Mhm.
fairness, what he has done in Russia is try to restore Russia to being a strong country, to being a united country. And it's not communist. Under communism, religion was forbidden. The Soviet Union, all those years up until they dissolved in 1991, were anti religion, which is the Marxist position which we're actually seeing grow more strong in the West, including the United States, anti-religion. And it's
Exactly.
interesting, Putin himself and the Russian people are practicing Orthodox Christians.
Right.
And the Orthodox Christian Church was actually founded in Kiev, Ukraine, of all places. And the person that's taken on that church and fought against it and abolished it almost, excuse me, is Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
The president of the Ukraine is the one that's basically shut that church down, locked up priests, locked up nuns,
Mm-hmm.
shut down the free press there, shut down newspapers and magazines that disagree with his regime, and locked up his opponent, the person that ran against him and is likely to run against him next time, except Zelensky has given him a long-term jail sentence. So actually, it won't matter anyway, because Zelensky also abolished their election that was supposed to happen this past October.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's all kinds of media coverage that in the West and in the United States in particular is just not true. Now, we know President Trump, back when he first was running for president in 2015, after he got elected in 2016, and saw the witch hunt that was after him then, the
Mm-hmm.
phony Russia hoax, and all these other accusations that were false. And he coined the term, fake news, that our media is fake news. Well, from that standpoint, it is, and it was, and it has been.
Mm-hmm.
So Tucker Carlson, when he was still on Fox News as the number one anchor in the world, cable anchor, um, when he talked against the Ukraine war, that we shouldn't have engaged in the Ukraine war, they called him a Putin apologist, and they portrayed him as he's in bed with Putin and the Russians, and just like Trump, they put him in that same thing. And at that time, it was later shown that NSA was spying on Tucker, on his email accounts.
Right.
And
Right.
through that, they learned that Tucker had not told any of his other friends, his family, no one, that he was interested in going to Moscow and interviewing Putin. And then
Mm-hmm.
immediately that was leaked out. And it came out that NSA intercepted his emails and his text messages and then tried to use that against him to
Right.
intimidate him that he shouldn't go. Now, at
Mm-hmm.
the time, he was still on Fox News. And I think that the whole idea of him going kind of, was basically sabotaged by our government. They felt they wanted to continue the narrative that Putin is evil and the Ukraine is wonderful and that Zelensky is the new George Washington of the Ukraine, all those other lies. And I think the fear was that if he interviewed Putin and the truth came out of what extent Putin tried to avoid the war initially of even invading Ukraine, they didn't want that coming out. And they didn't want somebody like Tucker Carlson, because of the credibility he had with his audience and with others throughout the country, they didn't want him to be the one interviewing Putin. They actually didn't want anybody to interview Putin and have any part of that side of the argument become public. So that was then. Of course, then Tucker is no longer at Fox News. He's an independent journalist who has decided that he's going to go interview people, especially people where there's an adversarial relationship or where the United States is against that person. Good example is that he went to Budapest and interviewed their president, Viktor Orban. And, it has barely come out in the news. Orban is very popular. He's won re-election 3 times. His approval rating is 70 or 80% in Hungary. And, right away, people don't realize the United States tried to sabotage his election. We interfered in the Hungarian election and he won anyway. So they didn't like Tucker going there to talk to him. And what they also didn't like the idea of when he did go and he did interview Orban, and Tucker Carlson asked him, what would help solve the problem in Europe with the war, with Ukraine versus Russia and the EU and NATO and all of that? And Orban says out loud, the one who could solve it is re-elect Trump. Oh, the administration went crazy here, but that's probably the truth. And that's what Trump's been campaigning on. And here's a leader from Europe agreeing that Trump is the one person that could solve the European war problem right now. So that's why Tucker Carlson has so much credibility, an enormous fan club, an enormous group of followers on the various networks that he's on. And that's why they don't want him being the one to talk to Putin at this time.
Sure.
So it's going to be very interesting. You have millions of people waiting for that
Right.
interview to be posted. And
Right.
that could happen, I'm guessing, late tonight or tomorrow sometime. Now, Moscow is 8 hours ahead of Washington, so 11
It,
hours ahead of your time.
it's
So it
gonna
may come
be
out in the middle of the night or it may get posted here tomorrow morning sometime early.
sure. It's gonna be big. So why, Tom? Why you think people thought that Trump is the only solution for the European problem? Why they thought so?
Because Trump, in the 4 years he was president, never started a war.
Mhm.
And that he had talked many times then and now. Well, then he wasn't talking about it because the war didn't start yet. But he has said since Biden has been president and since he's been campaigning for 2024, he's basically said the war would have been prevented if he had been president. And that might be true because historically, the truth of it was that Putin regarded Ukrainians as fellow Slavs, Slavic people with a common background, culture, and religion of Russians.
Mhm.
So Putin had said that he just wanted the only thing he wanted, two things, I should say, that he wanted from the Ukrainians were stop bombing the people in the eastern provinces, Donbass, and the other province nearby, because they're really pro-Russian and they speak Russian. They're ethnic Russian. Don't be bombing them. And the Ukrainian administration, going back to 2014, when we helped engineer the coup in the Ukraine, which led to an in-between president and then Zelensky taking his place. And basically, they've been attacking that group. Ukrainians passed a law, said, if you're going to be a Ukrainian citizen, you have to stop speaking Russian, stop observing cultural norms of being Russian. You have to give that up. And, who actually does that? So meantime, that was one of the big issues for Putin, that they were actually bombarding those people. And at the time in 2014, when Putin observed that the West, the US basically, partially the credit to Victoria Nuland, who is now Deputy Secretary of State or Undersecretary of State, that us, you, the US, engineered the coup in 2014. And the elected president of the Ukraine at the time, fled to Russia for safety. So he leaves. Our stooges get put in charge of the government since then, 2014. And Putin basically then realizes that he better take Crimea right away because it'll be hard to take that later. Now, Crimea is Russia's only warm water naval port,
Right.
Sebastopol in Crimea. Crimea was part of Russia since 1776.
Mhm.
So this isn't like it was always part of Ukraine and suddenly here's Putin taking it away. Putin's basically saying, that was Russian historically, and in 2014 they put it to a vote, and the Crimean citizens voted to be part of Russia.
Mhm.
So that's where they want to be. Where the citizens of the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, want to be is also part of Russia. So that was one issue. But the biggest issue for Putin in the last couple of years was that he negotiated with Zelensky, and they struck a deal that Ukraine would remain a neutral country,
Sure.
that it would not become part of NATO. Because if it became part of NATO, you would have NATO weapons, which are predominantly American, and US weapons put into Ukraine, and the border of the Ukraine and Russia puts those missiles within 8 minutes of the major cities and military bases of Russia, which are mainly on Russia's west coast, which would be on the Ukraine's east coast. So we would put our missiles there, which would be 8 minutes from striking Moscow. Now, I remember, even though I was a kid, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis in the United States, where Americans panicked. I was living in Chicago. Our family was in Chicago at the time. The panic was that the Soviet slash Russian nuclear missiles that were being put in Cuba could strike anywhere in the eastern half of the United States within 30 minutes.
So
So,
30
and we were like, that's not going to happen. We can't allow that to happen.
Mhm.
So the fact that Russia is saying, we don't want anybody within 8 minutes of our border, that's hostile. That's already talked. And if you listen to the US politicians, senators like Lindsey Graham and all the way up to the president saying, we need to overthrow Putin, remove him. We need to conquer Russia and divide it up. It's 11 time zones wide. It's a huge country. We need to divide that up, and then we can exploit their natural resources, the minerals. We can bring in companies like BlackRock that are all lined up to exploit the Ukraine. They can go into Russia and take out all of the minerals that they've got: oil, gas, uh, uranium, other minerals that they have in the ground. We could just take it. So that's why we need Russia to be overthrown. And the way they want the American public to look at it is they'll approve it. Our people will approve it if we keep painting Putin as a communist leader from the old days of make him be part of the Soviet Union, and not, the religious reformer basically in Russia. In the meantime, our administration, in its own wisdom, imposes sanctions. When Russia and Zelensky have this deal, we impose sanctions on Russia. That's going to destroy their economy. We're gonna kill them. It's going to hurt them. It's going to be everybody that's been to Russia since says, oh, you go in any grocery store, you talk to any citizen on the street, they're fine. Russian economy has grown as a result of our punishment of them. So that was another, brilliant mistake, foreign policy mistake. But in any event, this is the problem now, where Russia and Zelensky, Putin and Zelensky, strike a deal about 2.5 years ago. And the deal is, everything, they'll stay peaceful. There'll be no invasion by Russia. They'll agree to stop bombing everybody in the Donbass that happens to be Russian loyal people, and they'll stay neutral. That was the biggest issue. So then Boris Johnson, the leader of the United Kingdom, flies to Kiev and meets with Zelensky and says, you will not strike a deal with Russia. We won't allow it. I'm here on behalf of Joe Biden. So I'm here on behalf of the United States, the United Kingdom, and all the NATO countries, the rest of the NATO countries that are basically saying no deal, no peace deal with Russia. So you have to agree to use your military to attack Russia, and we will give you all of the equipment and money and military gear that you need for as long as it takes to invade Russia, conquer Russia. And
So
that was the position.
let me ask you a question. Thank you so much. But so right now we're thinking about the wall. You said Boris went to Ukraine and
Correct.
pushed them into the wall. And he said he's a representative of US, of United Kingdom and NATO. So
Right.
it sounds like the whole Western countries are against Russia, use Ukraine as a tool to against Russia. So why they hate Russia so badly?
Well, there's still this. I mean, this goes back to the years of the Soviet Union. And then after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, and, Gorbachev, head of Russia at the time, helped bring about, the decline of the Soviet Union and the founding of the Russian Federation to be a peaceful country. They wanted to do business with the West. They wanted to do business with the Western countries. But in the meantime, our administrations in the West, especially the United States, and the media on our behalf have been portraying Putin as an evil dictator and the Russians as the equivalent of the Soviet Union. There's no accounting for the fact that the country has become religious. And when the Ukraine war started out, Russia did not have a military capable of offensive operations. They
Right.
only had about 400,000 or 500,000 soldiers. Now, as a result of the sanctions we put on, and a result of the fact that we said, no deal, we're going to attack you, we're going to depose you, we're going to conquer Russia, then they went into a manufacturing footing like the United States did in World War II, 24/7 production in Russia for the last 2.5 years of military equipment, tanks, vehicles, artillery launchers, defensive weapons, radar systems, anti-aircraft systems. And basically, that whole system, which is state of the art, and some of our military analysts say is actually their air defense system is more sophisticated than the United States at the moment. So, based on that, Russia went to this 24-hour-a-day production. So when people here say, well, we should do like we did in World War II, convert our automakers into tank makers, turn Boeing and other aircraft manufacturers into jets, fighter jets like Grumman makes and Lockheed and Raytheon and all of these companies, have them turned into 24-hour-a-day production of war material that we can use to give to the Ukraine to attack Russia. Well, it turns out we're running out of a number of those things because the more sophisticated missiles, for example, made by Raytheon, you can't just turn the factory on and say, okay, everybody work some overtime. We're going to make thousands and thousands of these every day. Turns out then Raytheon says, well, they're very sophisticated, very meticulous production process. We can only make so many. And as quickly as we're giving them away to Ukraine and they're launching them at Russians and destroying them in the process, we can't replace them that fast. So now we're limited in how many missiles and other systems that we can provide, not only to Ukraine, but to ourselves to even keep our military well equipped, capable of fighting these weapons. So the bottom line is that the U.S. is weaker than it was because of giving away all this material, and we're weaker because much of the material we gave the Ukraine, their generals, there's reports of Ukrainian generals on the battlefield selling the equipment to the Russians on the battlefield, much less foreign weapons bazaars, which was also what happened with the $85 billion in equipment we left in Afghanistan. Much of that has ended up in many countries all over the world being sold by the Taliban. So much of what we intended has backfired.
Yeah. So the key point from my understanding is actually Russia becomes a normal country, or they try to become a normal country from Soviet Union, but the Western world did not trust them. They still think they're the communist or Soviet Union country, not as a normal country. Is that the cause of the war? They don't trust.
Well, that's what I mean. They want that narrative to prevail to make them an evil enemy, that we have to take them out. We have to go after them. Much like we heard the same things here of Saddam Hussein. He's got weapons of mass destruction, and he participated with Osama bin Laden in the 9/11 attack. Cheney was promoting that. George W. Bush was promoting that. All a lie. Just none of that true. So that's what we have now. If we're going to, I'll back it up a little bit politically. Our military industrial complex really doesn't care so much about the ideology or being patriotic or any of that. What they care about is making and selling weapons and making money. So that's why, in many ways, the United States for years now, you go back to Vietnam, we didn't really try to win Vietnam. We just wanted to fight forever and keep spending the money. And we've had that with the other wars since, just spend the money. Now we look at the current situation in Iraq. We spent a couple $2 trillion in our invasion of Iraq. We did kill Saddam Hussein, have him hung by the locals. And all of that, where are we today with Iraq? Iran is in charge of the region. And
Right.
what's interesting about that is, if I can back up again with a quick history lesson, when when we had the Desert Storm, Iraq in 1990, 1991 invades Kuwait. And then the whole world is all upset. And the US got very little oil at the time from Kuwait, but many countries were completely dependent, like Japan. Japan gave us billions of dollars to fight the war because they didn't have a military. So we were like hired mercenaries to put together a coalition under Desert Storm, go into Kuwait, get Saddam Hussein's army out of there, make them go back to Iraq. Now, at the time, I'll back up one step further. In the decade of the 80s, Iran and Iraq fought each other to a stalemate. They were using chemical weapons and gas and all kinds of, material banned. They fought for almost, I think it was about 8.5 years, to a draw, to a tie. And as a result of that, they both said, enough, let's just stop trying to kill each other. But they were still adversaries. So when we kick out, Iran and Iraq did not dominate the Middle East. They were pretty much co-equal, I guess, on opposite sides, but equal power. So now Iraq's military gets evicted from Kuwait. They're driving the long highway. Their tanks are going up the highway, two-lane road, all the way back to Iraq and another 200 miles from the border of Iraq to Baghdad. At the time, the U.S. military is just lined up like it's a turkey shoot, just taking one tank after the other. George H.W. Bush, head of the country, president of the country at the time, and he had been head of the CIA. So he knew the battle between Iran and Iraq and how they were fighting each other for power in the region. He orders General Schwarzkopf and the U.S. military stop killing the Iraqis, stop bombing their tanks, let them go free back to Iraq. Now, at the time, General Schwarzkopf, in charge of the U.S. military at the time, he's going berserk. Oh my God, what a sissy, what a baby, the president, not so many words. He's weak. How could he allow this? And so a lot of Americans were just, how could we allow that? How could we let these guys go back to Iraq, almost keeping their full military power? Well, because they realized that if they didn't, Iraq would lose power and Iran would take over the region. So now go forward a little bit, and you have, the 9/11 attack in the United States. So Cheney and Bush and Rumsfeld, the defense secretary, put out this lie that Saddam Hussein did this along with Osama bin Laden, that they were partners in the 9/11 attack. Complete lie, and they knew it. In reality, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden hated each other. And Saddam Hussein had issued orders, no members of al-Qaeda can seek sanctuary in Iraq. We don't want them. They're our enemy. But our administration telling the American people lies. Oh no, they're not our enemy. That they don't mean it. So anyway, they come up with the false narrative of the weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein is evil and his regime is evil. And we invade and we find Saddam Hussein after a couple months, turn him over to the Iraqis. They hang him, as it turns out. But the bottom line with that is Iraq, as much money as we spent, a couple $1 trillion, and as many Americans died killing Saddam Hussein and having the regime change in Iraq, it did not make Iraq friendly with us. So after so many years, from 2003 until 2008 or so, finally, Iraq tells the U.S., get out. We don't want you anymore. We want to be on our own. Get out. And so anyway, Iraq is on its own. We end up, even though they wanted us to not have any bases left, we still have 2 air bases in Iraq to this day, and the Iraqis don't like it. They still want us out. So, that's what happens. In the meantime, Today, if you look at the situation in the Middle East, Iraq is the weak sister because we destroyed their military and destroyed their leader. And now Iran is the most powerful country in that area. And they dominate Iraq. And so they're still telling us, get out. Some of the countries there, we have bases all over, these small bases that we put there, and we refuse to close the bases and send our soldiers home. We just had, the attack recently killing some of our personnel. And Iraq, we basically practically destroyed Iraq. They're under the thumb of Iran, thanks to us. That wouldn't have been. And
what a failure.
Yeah, George W. Bush was interviewed at the time about the invasion of Iraq. And what happened is that the advisors to his father, George H.W. Bush, his father's advisors recommended do not. That this was what they predicted this. Do not take out Saddam Hussein. Do not go into Iraq. Do not destroy their military. And I remember a reporter, a lady interviewing George W. Bush, and she asked him basically, because your father was head of the CIA, your father was president, your father had all this intelligence. Did you consult with your father before the decision to attack? And his answer was, because he's a born again Christian, his answer was, no, I didn't consult with my actual father. I consulted with my heavenly father. I got him to give me permission or advice to go invade Iraq. And that was his theory. But meantime, the decision to do it and the money we spent, money and treasure and personnel, humans that we spent on that war, now look at the results of that 20 years later. I was the FBI's first commander in Iraq in the summer of 2003 when we invaded. So now, 21 years later, look at what we did. Complete failure, and we completely upset the power in the Middle East to make Iran stronger than ever.
Right. So it's a strong money driven. So talk about money. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful history lesson that we probably cannot heard from anyone else. So talk about money. Our second topic today is about the budget. A comprehensive 118 billion national security supplement package bill. So total we have, that's a huge number. And we only got 20 billion in the border security. Think about that. 118 billion, the package. And then for the border security, we only got 20 from it. And the other is 60 billion to Ukraine, right, and 18 billion to Israel. And then what do you think about this package?
Oh, it's horrible. And that's why it's not going to pass. The deal struck with the administration, with the Republicans negotiating with them. The administration wants to say, okay, we'll close down part of the border or make it tighter and restrict the admission. Instead of, all these tens of thousands coming across every day, we'll reduce it to so many 5,000, 10,000. And in exchange, Republicans pass the money bill so that we can send the 60 billion to the Ukraine. And now what you've seen, because of the backlash of the public of how bad the border is, the Republicans are saying, no, we're not going to do that deal. And I saw a report this morning that there's 20 some senators, Republican senators in the U.S. Senate are saying, no, we're not making that deal. We're not allowing so many to come into the United States every day. And then we're not going to approve the 60 billion to go to the Ukraine in exchange for that partial reduction in the number of illegal migrants coming in. So it looks like as of today that the deal is not going to pass as it is. Now, maybe later we'll see if the rhinos in the Republican Senate or in the House basically, cave in to the administration. But I think what's happened is that, Biden for 3+ years has said, and all of his Mayorkas is another huge liar. They have said that, oh, the border, we don't need to do anything in the border. It's perfect the way it is. And so what? All these people are coming in. So during the first two primaries, one is the caucus in Iowa, and the pollsters all go to Iowa and they start interviewing all of the public. What do you think the number one issue is? And they start saying the border, letting all these people across the border. Now, historically, there's an old saying in the United States going back to when Bill Clinton ran for president. His campaign director, Carville from Arkansas, said at the time that the motto, when people were talking about other issues, what about the crime bill? What about this? Carville said, it's the economy, stupid. And
Right.
that's been a saying in United States politics now since the time Clinton ran. Well, now everybody was saying the same thing with our inflation and all the problems with the money problems that everybody's having, every family is having. Everybody expected when the primary season started this year in the election cycle, starting with the Iowa caucuses, that would be the number one issue, the economy. No, turns out it's the border. Then, after that, they go to New Hampshire. And the people in New Hampshire, you would think for them, 1,000 miles away from the Texas-Mexico border, would say, that's far enough away. We don't feel the impact of the open border, but we do feel the economic impact in our state. Well, it turns out that New Hampshire has one of the highest per capita death rates from fentanyl and opioid drugs that have come across the border from Mexico. So that became the big border. The border became the big issue in New Hampshire when they had the New Hampshire primary or the New Hampshire caucuses. And nobody expected that. All the political people are saying, wait a minute, what happened to, it's the economy, stupid. Now it's the border, stupid.
Right.
And that's a big issue. So now all of a sudden, Biden and the Democrats start seeing this, oh man, they're going to be in trouble later this year, and especially in the general election. If the public as far away as New Hampshire are worried about the border, illegals coming across the border, then they're going to be in huge trouble. So suddenly you start hearing them talk about, we need to make a deal and make it look like we're doing something. And the problem with is that much of what the Democrats are advocating is not real solutions. It's just more lies, but make it look like we're doing something. And, the old saying in politics, when all is said and done, usually more is said than done. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're looking at. Let's talk like we're going to be more restrictive on the border and we're going to do all of these things to reduce the migrant. No, they're not. And the money that they were talking about with trying to make a deal with the Republicans so that they could have money to go to the Ukraine, the problem with that is that it wasn't going to make a difference. And the administration was not really tightening the border. They were just hiring more people to provide services at the border, to babysit the migrants when they come in, to do the interviews where they request asylum and get a court date, 10 years from now to come back. And of course, they'll never come back. And in the meantime, you have some pretty stupid Democrats showing what it's all about or admitting what it's all about. For example, a couple of weeks ago, Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, basically says, we've got all these Chinese young men that have come across the border that are strong and healthy and vigorous with their designer bags. None of them are refugees or starving. And if anybody, and I've talked about this, on my other podcast, anybody knows anything about the CCP and China, then they know that you can't leave China just because you decide to take a trip. If your social credit score isn't high enough, you're not going to be able to buy a train ticket or an airplane ticket or anything else. So these Chinese young men in the thousands that came to South America end up at this hotel in South America, and then they catch buses, and the next thing, a week or two later, they're in the United States. Mm-hmm. And you've got Dick Durbin saying, we can't fill our military quotas. We can't hire enough people for the Army, Navy, Air Force. But we could take these migrants, put them in the military, and that would fast track them to be U.S. citizen, which means voters. And they'll
Right.
be so grateful for the Democrats bringing him in. They'll perpetually vote Democratic. Republicans will never win another election. That's the strategy of the Democratic Party in progress right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I just saw Speakerman, the Johnson. He has interviewed today. This morning I saw him, and he just say that Biden has all power to do something at border to stop the border crisis. And I just think no, Biden wouldn't do nothing
No, he
because
doesn't want to do anything.
he
And
is the
Biden,
one who caused the problem. So the question is, if Biden didn't do anything, it's not if, it's a fact. They didn't do anything. Is there something that the Congress can do? Johnson can do. Someone need to
no,
do
it really
something
takes the
about that.
president. He has control of the executive branch and what they've set up at the border and really border patrol or border control, I should say. Um, back in shortly after Biden became president, he issued the executive orders, stop the pipeline and all these other things, but mainly open the border.
Mm-hmm.
And he inherited everything Trump had.
Mm-hmm.
So if he didn't, and Trump at the time kind of joked about it, even though it's not funny, that all Biden had to do was go to the beach and do nothing and leave all of the Trump measures in place, all the policies, the stay in Mexico, the 28,000 Mexican troops that the president of Mexico put at our border, all of the policies, procedures, if they had just stayed the same, we would have had a controlled border like Trump had.
Right.
So Biden has the same number of border patrol officers, customs officials, all of the stuff he has is the same thing that Trump had,
Mm-hmm.
except he decided that whatever, if Trump did something that was bad, we got to eliminate any policy Trump put in place. So no more stay in Mexico. So now these individuals, like these Chinese young men, they come across the border, they check in, they give their name and their, date of birth and all of that. And the people at these checkpoints say, okay, good, you're in our system. You want to be a refugee, you want to be a whatever, come back in 10 years and then we'll hear your case. So under Trump, that's great. They would have been tourists in Mexico for 10 years and had their hearing in Mexico before they would have even been allowed to consider. Now, under U.S. law, once these people cross the border, then they're in our system. They become American persons. They're entitled to all the protections and legal protections and all of that, including being told, come back in 10 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever the backlog is in the court system to come back. So Biden inherited the strongest border protection the U.S. has had in its history and turned it into the weakest on purpose. These are
Right.
not because of lack of resources or because he
So,
didn't have the power or because somebody was obstructing him. He made the decision to do this, take
right.
down and destroy our border protection, and it's
Right.
all his doing. And now, when they see how bad this is going to be politically in the upcoming election in November, oh, we got to pretend like we're tightening the border. It wasn't our fault. This is something Trump did. No, no, no. This is something Joe Biden did on
Right.
his own. And he made sure that he picked people for key positions that would do what he wanted, like Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. They are all liars. They are all evil. They are all Marxists trying to destroy the United States. And on the path that they're doing a pretty good job so far.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. All I see the Biden regime is destroy from within. The
Exactly.
theory from Alinsky. And then talk about Trump. We saw a court decision today. The U.S. Superior Court just rejected President Trump's claim of presidential immunity in his federal election interference case. So we know that Thursday, the Supreme Court is supposed to review the Colorado ballot remove case. So what do
Right.
you foresee? What's going to happen on this
Well, I
case?
think as far as the upcoming case on February 8th, the Colorado, and not just Colorado, but it's going to apply to all of these other states that want to remove Trump from the ballot in their states and use the excuse of the 14th Amendment.
Mhm.
Now, again, back to the history, 14th Amendment was passed 1868, 3 years after the Civil War ended. And the provision, Section 3 of that act, basically says if you fought an insurrection, and that's why the word is important that the Democrats use that, an
Mhm.
insurrection or rebellion against the United States, you cannot run for national office. You can't run to be a senator or congressman. Didn't specifically say president, but that's the implication of national office. Now, the fear that the US Congress had was, in 1865, the end of the Civil War, when they're trying to put the country back together, North and South, Union, Confederate, the idea was that these generals from the Confederacy, Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet,
Mhm.
Pickett, others that were the heroes of the Confederacy, when the war ended, they went back to the South.
Mhm.
And the president, and both presidents, next Johnson and later Ulysses S. Grant, give them immunity. They're pardoned. You're all pardoned. We're not going to hold the fact that you fought against us, except for that provision in 14th Amendment. So
Mhm.
that's basically saying these gentlemen were so popular when they went back to their homes in Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia, the southern states, they were so popular there that the senators and congressmen in the North realized there'll be no stopping them. They'll be back in the U.S. Senate. They'll be back in the House of Representatives. So we got to pass an amendment, which
Mhm.
can't be easily undone by Congress,
Mhm.
taking 2/3 of a vote to do it. We'll
Right.
pass this amendment and they will not be able to run for national office, period.
Mhm.
Now they want to use that provision and say what happened on January 6th was an insurrection and it was led by Trump.
Mhm.
Therefore, Trump is an insurrectionist. Therefore, he cannot run for president again. He can't hold national office because of Section 3. Well, that remains to be argued in court. When Trump basically offered the District of Columbia, Mayor Bowser, and Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives 10,000
National.
National Guard soldiers to protect the Capitol and not allow anybody. They knew a million people were going to come to the Capitol to protest. So
Right.
that was number one. He offered all of that military protection of the Capitol.
Mhm.
Then he's giving a speech 8 blocks away at the White House. I'm sorry, 16 blocks away from the Capitol at the White House, where at the end of his speech, he says, now go to the Capitol and peacefully protest.
Right.
No insurrection, take over the building, stop the proceedings. Now, what was going on in the Senate chamber was the Senate, being led by Mike Pence, was having each state say, okay, how many delegates, for the president? How many this? How many that? So they were counting the results of all the votes. And
Right.
then that would certify Biden, or it would create doubt that maybe Biden didn't win and they should have, further review for a couple of weeks, something to that effect, which has happened in the past history of the United States. But in any event, later now, if Trump had never decided to run for, anything, just stayed and played golf, my, at his home, Mar-a-Lago, if he had never re-entered the political arena for 2024, he wouldn't have 91 charges placed against him. He wouldn't have this, he led an insurrection, another set of charges. All of this would have been forgotten. He could just stayed and played golf in
Right.
Florida. That would have been the end of it. But no, the Democrats, the deep state know how popular he is and
Right.
how many bad feelings there still are from
Right.
what happened in the 2020 election. And they're just scared to death of him. They're going to do everything they can. They're trying to do everything they can to keep him from becoming the president again or even getting on the presidential ballot. So this is like when he's so popular, that's why so many of these states are deciding, well, we're gonna keep them off the ballot. We'll use the 14th Amendment, and none of that has been litigated or approved or anything like that. So
Sure.
that's an issue. Now, the issue of immunity for the president,
Mhm.
a long-standing principle that the president of the United States all the time is making difficult decisions.
Right.
And the idea was that the president would be able to make these decisions knowing if he acted in good faith, basically he would have immunity.
Mhm.
And if not, every person every prosecutor from every little town or county or whatever could go after him. So this isn't just a fear that the Democrats would come after a Republican ex-president or in the future be the opposite party against each other. The idea is that those cases can be brought by anybody. So
Right.
now if you look at how that law will, it's not going to stand. But let's say that law did stand for long enough for Biden to be out of office, be ex-president Joe Biden. And in the decision, the appellate court in Washington, D.C. issued the decision, and they basically said that the indictment charging Trump, it looks pretty true. Well, that's ridiculous. You've got nothing is true in an indictment until it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt in court, which it hasn't been. But let's say Biden is the ex-president in a year, a little over a year from now,
Mhm.
February of 25, you could have people go back starting day one of his presidency. He
Right.
shut down the Keystone Pipeline. How many people improperly were fired, lost their jobs that were building and going to maintain that pipeline from the Canadian border to southern United States? That's one decision. Or stopping the drilling, stopping our oil production, stopping all of those issues, or the inflation, or the COVID shutdown, all of the decisions that happen, every little court, every little, two-bit prosecutor in the country can be bringing thousands of charges,
Right.
tens of thousands of charges against Biden. So that was the decision of why this immunity issue has been upheld in Supreme Court case after case over the years, because the idea is the president would be paralyzed because while he's in office, he would know that every little thing he decided, they could come back on him later and sue
Right.
him. So they
So,
could say, if they could say that, okay, he can't be charged with these crimes, alleged crimes, while he's president. But
right.
the day he's an ex-president, he can.
Right.
And yeah, probably would. And then the problem with that is, then that means that during the presidency, he really didn't have immunity after all. It
Right.
already didn't exist. He's already looking over his shoulder that if he does the right thing, he can be charged. His businesses can be destroyed. His family can be destroyed. All of these issues that will happen. So right now, the District of Columbia Court of Appeals that ruled that the immunity doesn't apply. It was a 2-1 vote, 3-member panel,
Mhm.
and I don't see it lasting. Now, right now, look at how many decisions the Supreme Court has on the table regarding Trump and the things they're trying to do to Trump. So now
Right.
here's another issue, this immunity. When is this going to go? Because basically, what the appellate court said is take that case back into the local court, District of Columbia, which is even more Democratic and anti-Trump. Take it back there and redo it, relitigate in local court. And so at some point, Trump is going to be appealing this in the next weeks ahead to get this before the Supreme Court. Well, the
Right.
Supreme Court already has this coming Thursday, February 8th. They have the decision about the
The
uh,
Colorado.
the Colorado taking him off the ballot. That comes up. Now you
Right.
would have this decision about immunity for the president. So the ramifications are severe. People think, oh, we got Trump now. He doesn't have immunity. Well, the problem is either will the next president, and not only that, but what they have not talked about is if the Supreme Court makes the decision that the president really doesn't have immunity, well, what about the past presidents that are still alive?
That's the thing.
What about Obama?
Right.
What about
Bill
Bush?
Clinton.
The
Yeah.
war, the war in Iraq.
Right.
What about Clinton? What
Right.
about all these guys? And even Carter's still alive. So you
Right.
have all of these ex-presidents that are alive and kicking
Mhm.
that any or all of them would be facing any kind of charge that any politician in every little county, city,
It's
province,
crazy.
district. These are not just federal cases. They're not just cases, applying to Trump or his presidency. This would be any presidency in the past and any future presidency would be paralyzed.
Right. So it seems like these people just want to stop Trump, no matter what way they take, the legal or sometimes illegal, or they just destroy the tradition. It doesn't matter
Exactly.
what the cost is.
Exactly.
They
Yeah.
just want to stop Trump. So we call this crazy.
And they
And
don't realize the ramifications like I'm talking about. Not
right.
just Trump, but it applies to every future and past president that's still alive.
Do they
So
have their mind? Do they have their brain if they make this kind of decision, this judge? So crazy. And then also, Tom, I just realized that the word they use is the Supreme Court was supposed to review the case. It's review, it's not make decision of the case. So what's difference between the review the case and or just hearing the case and make the decision? Is that means they're gonna just review the case and doesn't make any decision on the Colorado ballot case?
I think, I don't know. I don't know what distinction there would be because the Colorado case, the date is set for Thursday, February 8th for both sides to come in and argue their position. So to
Right.
me, that's a typical, what's different about Colorado is the request going with that to make an immediate or very soon decision within the next couple of weeks. Normally, with the Supreme Court, they get a request for maybe 5,000 cases a year to grant certiorari for, which means that they'll accept that case to bring it to the Supreme Court. Now, 90 or 95% of the cases that are presented for them to review or rule on, they don't even do that. So whatever the prior appellate court decision was stands. But in these cases, because of the impact on the election, on all these other states that want to take Trump off the ballot, or maybe some states want to take Biden off the ballot,
Mhm.
but because of that, there's an imperative to hear the case and make a ruling pretty quick.
Oh, sure.
So they're going to rule at some point, maybe in the next couple of weeks. Normally, they would hear a case, both sides would present, and all the notes would be taken, and the Supreme Court would issue the decisions maybe in June. That they would meet with each other and discuss it, and their clerks would exchange information, and at some point, then they start issuing one decision after the other. That's why normally in June you would see one decision followed by another, followed maybe 3 or 4 in a day get published. That's what they decided. But in this case, because of the election coming up, the primaries coming up, and the significance of it with especially the primaries right now, that's why they've agreed to take this case to hear it right away in February, which is this week now.
Okay.
Um,
We'll
and a
see.
lot of people wanted it heard, a month or so ago. But in any event, at the time, they said, okay, February 8th, that's when we're going to hear it. They haven't said what day they'll issue the decision. Most scholars of the Supreme Court are saying probably within the next couple of weeks, because you have all of these other states that have delayed their decisions. They said, okay, we're going to hold off and wait for Colorado. Whatever the Supreme Court decides there is going to affect many other states.
Mhm.
Just waiting for that decision.
Sure. So we think this month, maybe.
Hopefully,
We'll see. We'll
hopefully.
see. Well, so what do you have any guess that what's the result will be? What's the decision will be?
Well, my guess would be, uh, I almost don't want to jinx it by saying it, but
Okay, so
I would expect if the Supreme Court, you know, does what I think they're supposed to do and think they should do, it
right.
should be a 9-0 decision that no, that 14th Amendment does not apply to Trump. And all the states that you think you're going to use that amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, forget about it. We're
Mhm.
not going to allow that to be the excuse because you don't want him on the ballot.
Right. So this is so obvious. So hopefully the Supreme Court will make the right decision according to the law.
We hope. We can only hope.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Our time is up, and then we have some friends just say thank you to Tom and say, very education, very good information, and the people know a lot of history back on the current issue because the current issue is like not like just bump out. It must have some history behind, and
Right.
then some people just don't want us to know the history. So we
I
just
think that's true. And to all of your viewers and listeners, thank you very much for listening to me and encouraging me to, continue helping put the information out.
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you. And I'll make the Chinese version later today and I'll pass the post on the YouTube. Well, thanks again, Tom, for your
Okay, Cheyenne, thank you
information.
very much.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.